The man who helped lead the operation that killed Mexican drug lord El Mencho had his own life changed back in 2020, when gunmen disguised as road workers sprayed his vehicle with more than 400 bullets. 44-year-old Omar Garcia Harfuch, Mexico's current security chief, survived the attack, while 2 of his bodyguards and a bystander lost their lives. Since then, Harfuch has spent his days and nights inside fortified office buildings. He blamed El Mencho for the attempt on his life, so bringing down the brutal cartel leader was a deeply personal moment for Harfuch.
March 1, 2026. The Mexican government returns a dead body to a grieving family and proudly declares total victory. They tell the whole world that the banned substances war is completely over. But here is the terrifying reality hidden behind the headlines. The shocking event at the La Paz funeral home was not a quiet ending. It was actually the most sophisticated intelligence trap in criminal history. The authorities claimed the ultimate kingpin was finally laid to rest, yet every single piece of evidence points to something much darker happening behind closed doors. So, was El Mencho really inside that locked box, or did the man who fooled the Mexican state for 15 years just pull off his final, ultimate deception? To figure this out, I did not just sit back and read the official press releases. I dug deep into leaked intelligence files, secretly recorded audio from the burial, and the actual tactical maps of the operation to see what really went down during those highly chaotic 24 hours in Guadalajara. What I found will change absolutely everything you thought you knew about his final goodbye. Let us start by looking closely at the location itself, because the physical setting of this event is the first major red flag. The Mexican government, specifically the high-ranking security chief Harfuch, allowed this massive, very public wake to happen right in the middle of the San Andres neighborhood in Guadalajara. You have to understand, San Andres is not just some random, neutral territory where people happen to live. It is deeply embedded in cartel history. It has been a core stronghold for the Jalisco New Generation cartel for decades. This is their home turf. Their roots run deep into the concrete of those streets. For the state to allow the ultimate boss to be mourned openly in the exact place where his foot soldiers control the block feels like a massive surrender. It looks like the authorities are backing down, letting the bad guys have one last victory parade. To the outside observer, it seemed like the state was afraid to cause a riot. The media was completely confused. The public thought the government was showing unbelievable weakness by permitting a criminal to be celebrated like a fallen hero. So, why would the government ever allow this to happen? Why give them that stage? The answer is they were not retreating at all. They were actually baiting the biggest hook in modern criminal history. The funeral was nothing but a brilliant, terrifying cover story for a highly classified intelligence mission known internally as Operation Harvest. The name itself tells you exactly what they were doing. They were not there to stop a memorial service. They were there to reap a massive crop of information. They completely transformed the La Paz funeral home into a technological fortress. Every single corner of that building was compromised before the first flower arrangement even arrived. What I found was that the level of surveillance was absolutely staggering. The intelligence agencies secretly installed high-definition facial recognition cameras right at the main entrance doors. Every single person who walked in to pay their respects was instantly scanned and cross-referenced with national criminal databases in real time. The system matched jawlines, eye spacing, and scars against thousands of outstanding warrants. They planted hidden directional microphones in the hallways and the main viewing rooms to catch every whisper, every sob, and every muttered threat. They wanted to hear the quiet conversations between rivals plotting their next moves. They wanted to capture the panicked discussions about who was going to take over the missing money routes. They even deployed cell phone signal interceptors in the surrounding blocks to grab every text message and call made by anyone attending. But the most chilling part of this entire operation was the human element. There were dozens of undercover agents from the Criminal Investigation Agency walking around in plain civilian clothes. They were the ones handing out tissues to crying family members. They were the ones guiding grieving visitors to the restrooms. They were even pretending to be the catering staff, literally pouring hot coffee for cartel lieutenants while memorizing their faces and mapping out their hidden social networks. What struck me here was the absolute, cold calculation of how the government weaponized human grief to trap an entire ecosystem. They knew that in the underground world, showing up to a funeral like this is not just an option. It is a mandatory display of loyalty. If you do not show up, your absence is noticed, and it can be a death sentence. By turning this sanctuary of mourning into an invisible cage, the state did not just catch the high-ranking cartel bosses who were careless enough to attend. They cast a net so incredibly wide that they swept up absolutely everyone. They cataloged the faces of everyday civilians, the local business owners who had to pay protection money, and the innocent neighbors who just came out of community obligation. The line between a hardened criminal and an ordinary citizen was completely erased by a ruthless surveillance algorithm. The atmosphere inside the building must have been incredibly heavy. It was a suffocating environment of paranoia and unspoken dread. Everyone was looking over their shoulder, wondering who was watching, wondering if the waiter handing them water was actually a federal agent recording their every move. If you were a cartel associate, do you think you would have realized you were walking into a trap, or would the fear of your own bosses force you to show up anyway? Now, let us pull focus away from the hidden surveillance cameras scanning the crowd and look directly at the center of that viewing room. Right there, surrounded by thousands of expensive flowers and weeping relatives, sat the absolute focal point of the entire event: the casket. In any normal situation, this would be the place for final, heartbreaking goodbyes, but something about this specific wooden box felt incredibly wrong from the very first second it was wheeled into the parlor. The thing is, in traditional Mexican funeral culture, an open casket is practically mandatory. Families want to see their loved one last time. They want to lean in, touch the folded hands, kiss the cold forehead, and physically verify that the person they are mourning is actually the person they are burying. It is a vital, deeply emotional part of the grieving process. But the coffin of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was completely different. It was not just closed shut. It was physically locked down with heavy metal padlocks. And it was guarded 24 hours a day by two specialized private security elements who stood like absolute statues on either side of the wood. Their instructions were chillingly clear. No one, absolutely no one, was allowed to get within 1 arm length of that casket. If a grieving relative tried to lean forward or place a hand on the lid, they were immediately and firmly pushed back by the guards. Even the professional employees of the La Paz funeral home were strictly forbidden from performing their standard duties. They were not allowed to adjust the silk lining. They were not allowed to check the seal. The atmosphere in that room was incredibly thick with a very specific kind of tension. It was the heavy tension of 100 people all asking the exact same question in their heads, but being too completely terrified to say it out loud. Was the ghost actually inside that box? Because of this unprecedented secrecy, two opposing theories tore through the intelligence community like a wildfire. The first theory suggests the Mexican government never handed over the real body at all. Think about the logistics for a second. Why would the state give away their most valuable trophy before the forensic testing and detailed autopsies were fully finished? High-level intelligence analysts genuinely believe the government delivered a decoy body. They think the state provided a bait box, perhaps filled with sand or a nameless corpse, just to trigger the public funeral. By doing this, they could lure the criminal network out into the open for Operation Harvest, while keeping the actual remains under heavy military guard in a secret laboratory somewhere in the capital. It would be the ultimate, ruthless chess move. They let the cartel have their public mourning ritual, but quietly keep the physical proof of death entirely for themselves. But then, there is the second theory, and it is arguably much darker and grounded in the brutal reality of the banned substances war. This theory states the body inside the locked coffin was indeed the real Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, but in such a mutilated state that it could never be shown to the public. We know the military operation in Tapalpa was not a quiet arrest. It was a high-intensity firefight involving heavy weapons, relentless crossfire, and extreme violence. If the kingpin was caught in that tactical storm, the physical damage to his body would have been absolute. In this scenario, the government and the cartel leadership both had a rare, shared interest in keeping that casket permanently locked. For the cartel, showing a broken, destroyed, and unrecognizable version of their invincible leader would completely shatter the powerful myth they had spent 20 long years building. They desperately needed him to remain a terrifying legend, even in death. For the government, putting a violently mutilated corpse on public display could easily spark a massive wave of public sympathy or trigger a devastating retaliatory uprising from his most radical, loyal followers across the country. Both sides actually needed the mystery much more than they needed the transparency. They both chose to protect the myth by hiding the brutal reality. Which means, at the end of those 24 long hours, not one single person in that room could swear they actually saw the man they were burying. Do you buy the decoy body theory, or do you think the government was just hiding a heavily damaged corpse to control the narrative? While the grieving family and the loyal foot soldiers were completely mesmerized by that locked wooden box sitting quietly in the center of the room, the intelligence analysts were looking at something else entirely. From their hidden command center, located just 2 blocks down the street, the government agents were intensely staring at a glowing wall of high-definition monitors, frantically scanning the massive crowd for a face that simply was not there. They were not looking at the hundreds of people who actually showed up to mourn the fallen kingpin. They were obsessively searching for the one specific man who was completely missing from the tragic picture. Meanwhile, the dark tension inside the funeral home was quietly shifting away from the dead and pointing directly toward the living. The specific man they were desperately looking for is heavily known in the criminal underworld as L03. For many long years, this dangerous man was carefully positioned and publicly recognized by everyone as the ultimate, unquestionable heir to the entire Jalisco new generation cartel empire. He was the chosen successor, the direct continuation of the royal criminal bloodline, and the only person breathing with enough street authority to step up and keep the massive organization from completely tearing itself apart. When a powerful king finally falls, the prince is absolutely required to stand bravely before the vicious army and immediately claim the crown. In the brutal, unforgiving politics of the violent, banned substances war, a funeral of this massive scale is never just a simple time for crying and saying goodbye. It functions as a formal, highly visible coronation. It is the exact, critical moment when the new leader boldly stands by the wooden casket, looks directly into the eyes of the ruthless lieutenants, and silently demands their absolute, unwavering loyalty. But L03 never even walked through those heavy glass doors. He completely abandoned his most defining moment. This is the part I couldn't get past. Why on earth would the officially designated heir willingly throw away his golden opportunity to secure his billion-dollar throne exactly when the sprawling cartel is at its absolute weakest point? It simply makes no logical sense whatsoever until you finally realize what he was actually so deeply afraid of. The initial, naive assumption by the general public was that he was just terrified of Operation Harvest. Everyday people genuinely thought he stayed away because he simply did not want to be quickly arrested by Harfuch and his massive team of undercover federal agents. But if you deeply study how these high-level cartel operators actually think and operate, you quickly realize that theory is completely wrong. Men exactly like L03 do not fear the standard police in that traditional way. They already have absolute armies of expensive lawyers, endless streams of dirty bribe money, and massive convoys of customized armored vehicles to violently handle the government authorities. They are literally built from the ground up to aggressively fight the state. No, the truly chilling reality is that he was not hiding from the powerful Mexican government at all. He was hiding from the very people standing quietly inside that specific funeral parlor. The reason this matters is, his calculated absence completely shatters the fragile illusion of a united criminal front and definitively proves that the cartel is already bleeding heavily from the inside. By refusing to bravely show his face, L03 sent an incredibly loud, terrifying message to the entire watching underworld. He could not guarantee his own physical safety while surrounded by his own supposed loyal allies. He absolutely knew that the viewing room was already filled with deeply ambitious faction leaders, bitter rival commanders, and highly opportunistic hitmen who were already coldly calculating exactly how to take the massive throne for themselves. Walking blindly into that enclosed, highly emotional space would have been a mathematically guaranteed suicide mission. He clearly understood that the exact moment he confidently stepped next to that locked wooden casket, one of his own trusted captains might suddenly pull a hidden weapon and brutally end his new reign before it even officially started. His glaringly empty chair at the memorial service was definitely not a simple act of personal cowardice. It was a glaring warning sign that a massive, incredibly bloody civil war had already violently begun right under the quiet surface. The once unified empire was actively breaking apart into uncontrollable splinters. If you were placed in his shoes, would you risk your life to claim your throne at the funeral or stay in the shadows? How exactly do the most dangerous criminals in the world communicate when they know the government is listening to every single breath they take? When the federal authorities have tapped every cell phone tower, hacked every encrypted messaging application, and deployed undercover agents to watch your every move, you simply cannot send a text message or make a quick phone call. You have to go completely analog. You have to use a language so incredibly old and deeply traditional that no algorithm or facial recognition software could ever possibly decode it. In the highly paranoid, violently secretive underworld of the Mexican banned substances cartels, the ultimate communication network does not run on electricity or internet cables. It runs on flowers. During a major cartel funeral, the floral arrangements that arrive at the viewing room are never just simple gestures of sympathy or condolences. They are highly calculated, beautifully disguised public statements. They are territorial claims, hidden death threats, and silent oaths of absolute loyalty, all carefully woven together in bright colors and expensive petals. At the same time, while the intelligence agents were desperately looking for the missing heir, the actual people standing inside the La Paz funeral home were focused on the terrifying messages blooming right in front of them. The room was absolutely overflowing with massive, incredibly expensive floral wreaths sent from different regional commanders across the entire country. But there was one specific arrangement that completely stopped the room cold. It was not just a normal wreath. It was a massive, meticulously crafted sculpture made entirely out of deep red and pure white roses. The flowers were carefully shaped to form the exact, undeniable silhouette of a fighting rooster, Everyone in that room immediately knew exactly what it meant. For his entire criminal career, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was famously and fearfully known by a very specific street nickname. He was El Señor de los Gallos, which translates directly to the Lord of the Roosters. Having his personal, terrifying emblem recreated in beautiful flowers right next to his locked wooden casket was a profound, deeply emotional statement. But here is the massive, chilling problem that immediately sent a wave of silent panic through the entire grieving crowd. Nobody actually knew who paid for that specific rooster. The core conflict tearing the room apart was a simple but deadly question of authorship. Whose wreath is this? If you were an investigator carefully analyzing this, would you log this specific wreath as loyalty or war? The intelligence analysts monitoring the hidden cameras debated two completely opposite, incredibly dangerous theories. Let us break down the first possibility. If that giant fighting rooster was secretly commissioned and delivered by the loyal faction belonging to Il-03, then it was a beautiful, unwavering oath of absolute loyalty. It was a very clear, powerful message to the entire underworld that the royal bloodline still survives, the original mission continues, and the son is fiercely honoring the legacy of the fallen father. It would mean the cartel is standing strong and united under the exact same banner. But what if we look at the second possibility? What if that rooster was not sent by a loyal son at all? What if it was actually sent by the fierce rival faction led by a heavily armed commander known as El Jardinero, which translates to the gardener? If the gardener sent that rooster to the funeral, then the entire meaning of those red and white roses violently flips upside down. It is no longer a tribute. It becomes a sick, twisted mockery. It becomes an arrogant, highly disrespectful declaration of total war. Sending the dead king his own personal symbol is a brilliant, terrifying way for a rival to say that the Lord of the Roosters is finally dead and the new gardener is officially taking over the entire yard. It is a flex of pure power, placed right in the middle of the enemy camp, daring anyone to do something about it. In other words, while the heartbroken family members were shedding real tears over the tragic loss of a father and a husband, the heavily armed men standing quietly behind them were already aggressively dividing into bitter, violently warring factions. The quiet funeral parlor was completely fracturing right before their very eyes. The beautiful flowers surrounding that locked wooden casket were secretly screaming absolute promises of extreme violence and inevitable bloodshed. The silent room was violently splitting right down the middle, preparing for brutal war. The morning of March 2nd, 2026, finally arrived. The sun rose over the tense streets of Guadalajara, signaling the absolute end of the suffocating 24-hour wake. According to the official schedule publicly released by the government, the dark hearse was supposed to travel directly from the La Paz funeral home to a highly secured, well-known cemetery located in Zapopan. Because of this announcement, hundreds of national journalists, international photographers, and heavily armed police officers lined the expected route. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the final, definitive chapter of the most dangerous man in Mexico to be officially buried in the dirt. What happened next, however, was a brilliant tactical maneuver straight out of a classified military playbook. About 15 minutes into the slow, mournful drive, the entire funeral procession reached a major, crowded intersection. Instead of continuing straight toward Zapopan as publicly promised, the lead vehicles suddenly executed a flawless, perfectly synchronized turn. The movement was incredibly smooth and completely deliberate. The trailing security vehicles immediately swerved to block the intersection, effectively boxing out the press vans and completely cutting off any journalists or rogue cartel followers trying to tail the procession. At that exact same second, the government helicopters hovering loudly overhead did not hesitate or circle around in sudden confusion. They instantly banked hard and seamlessly changed their flight paths to follow the brand new route. This coordinated movement in the sky proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that this sudden detour was not a chaotic accident or a last-minute panic. It was a highly classified, heavily premeditated extraction plan executed to absolute perfection. In the blink of an eye, the most heavily monitored corpse in the entire country simply vanished. The phantom convoy completely lost the media tail. According to leaked intelligence whispers that surfaced days later, the diverted hearse eventually rendezvoused with a heavily armored military convoy waiting quietly on a secure tarmac. From there, the locked wooden casket was allegedly loaded onto a covert military aircraft and flown directly to Aguililla, the rural, isolated hometown of the fallen kingpin in the state of Michoacán. The federal government had a very specific, deeply calculated reason for orchestrating this massive, theatrical deception. They knew that if they allowed the cartel to bury their founding father in a massive, opulent mausoleum in Zapopan, they would essentially be handing the criminal organization a permanent, indestructible monument. In the dark history of the Mexican banned substances war, the grand tombs of legendary bosses almost always become twisted pilgrimage sites. They transform into literal narco shrines where young, aspiring hitmen go to pray for protection before a violent job, where ambitious lieutenants gather to swear blood oaths of loyalty, and where the terrifying mythology of the cartel is physically worshipped year after year. The state desperately wanted to completely deny the syndicate that dark sanctuary by secretly flying the body to Aguililla and quietly burying it in an anonymous, completely unmarked grave with absolutely no headstone or identifying markers. The government was trying to permanently erase Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes from the physical world. They wanted him to disappear into the rural dirt without a single trace, leaving his surviving followers with absolutely nothing to visit, nothing to worship, and no physical banner to rally their fractured troops around in the future. At this point, I started questioning the ultimate logic behind this drastic government strategy and the profound psychological impact it creates on the streets. Does burying a notorious banned substances lord in a secret place that nobody knows actually erase him from history? Or does it ironically just make him live forever in the minds of the people? When you intentionally deny his violent supporters a physical grave to mourn over, you do not necessarily destroy the powerful memory of the legendary man. Instead, you strip away his human mortality and essentially elevate him into an immortal ghost story that criminals will whisper about for generations. And ghosts are always infinitely harder to fight and kill than breathing, bleeding men who bleed red blood. The Mexican state truly thought they were just burying a broken body that chaotic morning, but by wrapping his final resting place in such intense, impenetrable secrecy, they might have accidentally guaranteed that his dark, violent legend will survive long after everyone who attended that tense funeral is completely gone. The empty space where a tombstone should proudly stand is now the loudest, most dangerous message of all. After the ghost convoy vanished into the mountains of Michoacán and the locked wooden box was presumably buried in an unmarked grave, the Mexican government took a massive sigh of relief. The chaotic streets of Guadalajara did not burn. The national media was completely blind to the actual location. Operation Harvest had successfully scanned thousands of faces, and the authorities genuinely believed they had flawlessly closed the final chapter on the most violent, banned substances lord in modern history. The elaborate surveillance operation was quietly celebrated as a total, unprecedented victory for the state. Everyone in the intelligence community truly thought the long, exhausting nightmare was finally over and the terrifying ghost of the kingpin was permanently put to rest. That's when, out of absolutely nowhere, an encrypted audio file quietly landed on the highly secured desks of the highest-ranking intelligence analysts in Mexico City. The secret recording was completely raw. It was secretly captured on a hidden digital device during the actual, highly classified burial ceremony. Wherever they finally lowered that heavy wooden casket deep into the cold earth, someone standing right there at the edge of the hole had a microphone running. But if you expect to hear the heartbreaking sounds of a grieving family, a local priest reading traditional religious prayers, or the quiet sobbing of a heartbroken widow, you are completely wrong. There was absolutely no crying on this leaked tape. There was zero sadness. Instead, the raw audio captured the cold, steady, and incredibly confident voice of a man who undoubtedly belonged to the absolute inner circle of the massive criminal organization. He was definitely not delivering a mournful, emotional eulogy for his fallen boss. He was calmly reading a formal, terrifying oath of absolute revenge. As the seasoned intelligence analysts sat in their secure rooms and listened to the scratchy audio play through their expensive headphones, their blood ran completely cold. This anonymous man standing over the fresh grave was not just making vague, overly emotional threats about making the federal government pay for what they did. He was actually reading highly specific, heavily classified intelligence out loud. The calm voice on the dark tape began methodically listing the exact full names of top-tier federal security officials. He flawlessly recited the specific daily schedules and the personal movement patterns of top police commanders. He casually mentioned the private residential addresses of high-ranking government cabinet members. And, most horrifyingly, he detailed the exact private schools where their innocent children were currently enrolled. He knew their secure escape routes. He knew their hidden safe houses. He knew absolutely everything about them. And this is important because this single audio file instantly threw the entire Mexican national security apparatus into a massive, unprecedented state of absolute red alert. For so many long years, the federal government had been aggressively hunting the top-tier leaders of this ruthless syndicate. They confidently used advanced facial recognition cameras, intercepted local cell phone towers, and deployed brave undercover agents to fiercely track down the elusive cartel bosses. But this dark recording at the secret gravesite suddenly proved a terrifying, alternate reality. While the government task force was busy tracking the cartel had been quietly and meticulously tracking them right back. The criminals had completely mapped out the personal, private lives of the very men and women assigned to destroy their massive empire. The government realized in a sheer moment of absolute panic that their brilliant intelligence operation might have successfully captured the faces of hundreds of low-level street dealers, but the powerful cartel had successfully captured the most vulnerable weak points of the entire state structure. The confident hunter had suddenly become the paranoid hunted. The powerful people in charge of national security suddenly had to scramble to violently protect their own innocent families from a dead man. Hearing this, do you think this was just the desperate rambling of a dying cartel, or terrifying proof that they still have moles at the highest levels of the government? The chilling reality of this situation is that you simply do not get that level of incredibly specific, highly classified operational detail just by watching police officers from the street. You get those exact names and those hidden addresses because someone sitting safely inside the most secure rooms of the state is quietly feeding you the information. This leaked tape served as a horrifying declaration of a brand new war where the dangerous enemy is already safely inside. Looking back at everything I have uncovered about those chaotic 24 hours in Guadalajara, I realize that the entire world has been completely missing the true point of this dark story. We have spent so much time obsessing over the brilliant tactical execution of Operation Harvest, the chilling facial recognition cameras hidden in the funeral parlor walls, the deeply mysterious absence of the designated hair known as L03, the violently terrifying floral arrangements shaped like fighting roosters, and that deeply disturbing leaked audio recording from the unmarked gravesite. We have been completely focused on the physical hard evidence of the banned substances war. But the real lesson of this entire terrifying saga is not about how you successfully trap a criminal network or how you hide a broken corpse from the media. The ultimate, most dangerous lesson here is about the sheer power of human belief and the unstoppable nature of a ghost. You see, the Mexican federal government made a massive, fundamental mistake in their overall psychological strategy. They genuinely believed that if they could just physically erase the man, they could permanently delete his immense power over the people. They honestly thought that by highly securely locking down his wooden casket, by strictly preventing his grieving family and his loyal foot soldiers from seeing his dead face, and by secretly burying his remains in an anonymous, unmarked hole in the rural dirt of Michoacán, they were completely destroying his dark legacy. They wanted to deny the syndicate a physical shrine. They desperately wanted to prevent the creation of a permanent monument where future generations of cartel hitmen could gather to worship their fallen king. But in their desperate, highly calculated effort to hide the brutal reality of his physical death, the state accidentally achieved the very exact opposite result. Their intense secrecy did not destroy the man, it completely immortalized him. By refusing to show the public a weak, bleeding, and lifeless body, they inadvertently protected the terrifying, invincible illusion that Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes had spent over 15 years carefully building. They took a mortal, flawed human being who could be tracked, hunted, and killed by military bullets, and they accidentally transformed him into a towering, invincible myth. And this is the most terrifying part of the entire situation. An invisible myth absolutely cannot be shot. A ghost cannot be arrested, safely put in heavy handcuffs, or locked inside a maximum security prison cell. A deeply entrenched urban legend is infinitely more dangerous and resilient than a flesh and blood enemy. Because, as long as the heavily armed men on the dangerous streets of Mexico still believe in the towering legend of the Lord of the Roosters, his violent empire will absolutely continue to thrive and relentlessly shed blood in his dark name. The government thought they were burying a defeated cartel boss, but they actually planted the perfect, indestructible seed for a massive, never-ending religious cult of violence. The absolute lack of closure here is exactly what will fuel the next generation of extreme bloodshed. This entire situation leaves us completely surrounded by dark mysteries and terrifying possibilities. The grand illusion of absolute state control was completely shattered by the sheer brilliance of the cartel response. Every single detail we analyzed today points toward a future filled with even more chaotic violence and unpredictable power struggles. The authorities might have successfully logged thousands of faces into their facial recognition databases, but they completely failed to capture the true spirit of the criminal syndicate. The organization simply adapted to the trap and swiftly evolved today. So, after walking through the evidence, who do you think actually won the day at the La Paz funeral home? The government with their hidden cameras, or the cartel with their hidden agendas? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one of your theories, and I truly want to know exactly how you interpret these chilling underworld signals. Do you side with the tactical brilliance of the state intelligence agencies, or do you deeply respect the cold, calculated survival instincts of the criminal syndicate? The banned substances war is fundamentally a highly complex and ongoing violent, brutal shadow war of competing narratives, and the truth remains buried. And the biggest question still lies beneath that deep soil. Is El Mencho really rotting under 3 meters of dirt, or is he still out there, in the shadows, smiling while watching the world tear itself apart over an empty coffin?